Tribe. I'm just setting up and wanted to feel into this deep inquiry. All right, so here's the question. Where do we source safety in our relationships? And I say relationships, it could be, marriage, it could be that you're single and you have multiple people, it could be that you're polyamorous. I really want to point out that we're in relationship with everything all the time, that we are not alone in the universe. And, the inside every relationship, whether it's a boss or like a colleague or someone from church, there's a sense of like, um, there's a sense of a kind of a bond or connection. There's a me, there's them, and then there's a we, there's an us. And within that universe, there's often a sense of like, am I safe? Am I secure? Am I, and I also want to point out that kind of sense, because it's almost a mystical sense, it's not easily defined, it's not easily like quantified. There's also often a equally important but seemingly opposite like pull towards like freedom and adventure, and how liberated are we to be ourselves and follow our truth. And so maybe we'll get into talking about how safety is kind of this foundational piece that offers us a lot more, that can offer us, this freedom and exploration, that those two things aren't necessarily opposites, that they're commensurate, but a lot of times in many relationships we'll feel um, like the more free the other person is, the more we need safety, or the more, the other person needs safety and security, the more that we need like, freedom and liberation and not to feel so constrained. So those two things will toggle. And it's so human. I just want to say how incredibly universal this is. So having worked with lots of couples, I currently I'm working with 5 couples who are all working on some degree of this safety freedom paradox. And then I'm also in it myself with my, this year we're going to be 20 years open marriage with Michael. And I'm also celebrating this month that I'm in a triad, and we are at our 5-year anniversary. So that's fun. But today's inquiry is hopefully cross-applied to whether you're monogamous or any type of relationship. So I'm going to be very general about the relationship style, and I will say that security and safety is a human need. It's at the base of the Maslow's hierarchy. It's so fundamental. And where do you get that from? And I want to speak to what multidimensional beings we are, because at some level, our sense of safety is kind of in the nervous system, comes early on in our imprinting from our family of origin. Like there's a baseline, like, do I feel safe in my relationships with my mother, father, all of our other, our original family imprints. And then that will prepare us for, how we may or may not feel safe in other relations. And there's a whole school, and I'm not going to get into attachment theory, but right now it's like the hottest thing in psychology, and I highly recommend that you really look at the attachment theory and the various attachment styles. But I really want to simplify it for the sake of us going like, hey, it's this general sense of, am I safe in my relationship, and where do I feel that safety from? So let's talk about safety itself. You might have those early imprinting, but then there's also a safety that comes from the uniqueness of that connection. If you're just meeting someone, it's not likely to feel safe because there's not a lot of backstory or trust, or there's not a lot of experience to base that on. And then there's the question of how they bring, like, who they are and what they bring to the relationship. So I really want to say that we have our own internal sense of safety. They have theirs. And then there's the relationship entity that has its own like universe, and it's a dynamic and it's a co-creation. And so there is like inside ourselves a sense of safety that is our nervous system is sort of the I want to say like tuning fork or dowsing rod, or like that's the grand indicator of like, am I safe? Because what safety means is that we're able to be in our center, if we're down regulating, if our nervous system is relaxed enough that we can that, and we feel resourced enough to like make conscious decisions. When we're not safe, obviously our animal goes into fight or flight or extreme freeze and various other strategies to try to survive. And so when you're in survival mode, that animal in you is not going to make the most conscious, considerate, empathetic decisions. Instead, it's going to be reactive. And so there's this internal experience, and then of course if we are in partnership with someone else who's having their own reaction and experience, their own activation in their nervous system, then it's really hard to feel safe. Like even if we're pretty chill and calm and in our center and our partner's freaking out, how well do we handle then? So having established that safety can be measured by the nervous system, and there are physiological signs like to know if you're feeling like heart rate. And I mean, actually it's kind of from kink that I learned when I was playing a lot with power play and domination and submission. It was especially in the dominant role, like checking someone's pulse and their pupil dilation, and like the there's whether they're sweating or not, like these vital signs will definitely tell us what's happening in the nervous system. And that's important. And it's kind of mixed. It can get hard to detect because the more we get aroused, it could be, ooh, someone's really aroused or someone's in fight or flight. It gets a little harder to tell. But in general, there is when we're in a bond with someone, we'll start to establish certain like norms. There's a culture created within the relationship, and that culture is built on what's a win-win, what do we like to do together, what are our shared activities or exercises, and what's okay to do when we're not together. And so there's a lot of negotiation that will happen the more that a relationship matures. And there's a moment after the inception of a connection that is kind of this new defining moment of like, how do we have a relationship defining conversation. And maybe that's, what do we call the relationship? And that might give someone some security. Are we dating? Are we boyfriend, girlfriend? Are we partners? And that definition, for some people, that's like, oh, there's some safety in that. But the relationship itself might come to a place of like, let's discuss agreements. And I want to say up front that agreements, ideally not rules, not like this is the law of the land, but agreements which are mutually negotiated and to both partners really consent to. This practice can create a sense of safety because we're not, psychically trying to guess what's okay and not okay with our partners, but it can also create a sense of like a pseudo safety, which is, oh, I feel safe because there's agreements. But and then what happens is we start to rely on our partner to take care of us, meaning take care of our safety as opposed to us taking care of our own. and being the true source of it. So let me give you an example. Uh, in in a relationship, a lot of times people choose different strategies, different structures, or monogamy is an example of a strategy that might say, hey, I don't want you to have, it's okay to have friends of the opposite sex, but it's not okay to cuddle or to kiss or to wherever you draw that line. And that may feel good and clear, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to have like feelings come up. Like having agreements does not mean that you're not going to have emotional like insecurity or jealousy, or it just means those behaviors are not going to happen. And also what's true is those behaviors may happen and you may or may not have emotional reaction to them. It's just what those are. The agreements are basically like the behaviors that define the conduct in the relationship, but one might have insecurity in their nervous system regardless of what the agreements are. And one might feel like, oh, now that we are, for example, married and have monogamy, set the way that we want it to be set, because ideally you have conscious monogamy, which isn't just a default, it's actually negotiated. Any kind of relationship is up to the people involved to define the relationship. It's like, oh, what's the shape of my heart? What's the shape of your heart? What do we want to co-create? Let's do that consciously. Let's negotiate that. But my question is, where are you negotiating that from? Because a lot of people will negotiate their agreements and their boundaries from their wounding and their past experiences that are like, ooh, I have this pain and I don't want to feel that pain again, so let's set the limit here. And then there's a place in which they're creating a container to try to feel safe, but then they might actually feel constricted themselves, or like they're imprisoning their partners. And that's really different than going inside and saying, well, what's my truth? The most like conscious, growthful, liberating relationships are ones in which we build in the desire to grow together. So we build in this like, how can I stretch? How can we try something new? How can I learn about myself by doing that which is uncomfortable? Or maybe I failed in the past, but I want to do it with this new partnership in this new way, or the same partnership, just in a new way. And that allows me to expand who I thought I was and not stay to the old shell of what's comfortable and what's going to, prevent me from feeling too many feels. So the encouragement on that is, hey, let's create our boundaries and our agreements around what is like my core and my potential and what I'm really wanting in the relationship, not just let's make it from fear, like this is what I don't want to experience. Yet, if you strive to, you set these growthful boundaries that are going to stretch you and give each other permission to grow, it may be that your capacity to show up and process the feels that might bring up diminishes or fluctuates. So this is really key, because when we set boundaries or agreements, sometimes it's like, hey, we write this down or we make this mutual agreement, and it's based on a particular state that we might be in. Like, hey, I'm feeling resourced, or I'm feeling clear, or maybe we make it out of like, I'm triggered, and that's how we make our boundaries. But then later we're not triggered, or later we are triggered, and the way that we relate to those limits totally changes, which it does. So what I want to say is that our capacity is a moving target. Our ability to process, our ability to like handle, and our reactions, like we can set our boundaries and goals, and then we can't anticipate in real time what's going to arise and how it's going to feel. So part of the agreement, negotiating process should be one in which you adjust for or give permission for the moving target that it is, that that you actually build in the sense that uh, hey, this is our ideals, this is what we're intending, but we need to renegotiate that as we grow. And one of the things that I've noticed, especially right now, as I'm doing a lot of coaching, is that the clients who have my relationships that have set certain boundaries, those have changed during the pandemic. So we have, that's my cat, by the way, we have this global crisis that has this kind of collective trauma, and it impacts all of our, if we're sensitive, empathic beings, all of our nervous systems are already impacted. And so what we used to be able to handle may totally shift because of shifting circumstances and also shifting internal capacity. So important that as we negotiate these, relationships, it's like, ooh, this is what's real for now, and it's not only subject to change when something arises, but it's perhaps subject to reevaluation as time goes on. So there's a sense of like, ooh, the relationship is growing and changing, and there's some like freedom and flexibility within it, and then there's some security that comes from that. So the key here is, where are you sourcing your security? Because if it's from the outside relationship and your partner's behavior, then there's a way in which you're outsourcing, your own sense of center. And when we can say, oh, wait, my true north, my true indicator of security comes from my nervous system, I don't want to give that away. I want to like stay connected to that. I'm going to stay empowered, stay sensitive to what am I able to handle? What do I feel? If I'm not feeling secure, it's not, oh, I need my partner to stop doing this or do this in order to address me. Instead of address my feelings. Instead, it's like, ooh, what does my nervous system need? My partner's not psychic. They might be attuned and feeling my nervous system, but it's up to me ultimately to take care of this and to downregulate when needed, or to get support from a friend, or to do my yoga and meditation practice, or whatever it is that nourishes me, and to know and to learn and to be in partnership with my nervous system. And when we deeply connect to, I am the source of my own safety, when we make that big adjustment, like safety is not something that someone provides for us, it's something that we're maturely as adults in charge of, then what happens is a total radical liberating shift in the relationship, especially if both parties are taking responsibility, because then it's like, ooh, I'm going to communicate, I'm feeling off and threatened, and first I'm going to look at what I need. And sometimes that's, ooh, I needed to take care of it within myself. And sometimes it's, I need to make a request within the relationship for behavior to adjust until my capacity expands. But right now I'm needing to take care of this. And if we vow to take care of this first, then we don't have the shame or the embarrassment of, oh, I'm so sorry that I'm freaking out. I'm so like, there's not so much need to apologize. And the requests to ask our partners to change their behavior or to look at renegotiating a boundary doesn't come from a place of like, oh, you should know, blame and shame. You should have known this. You should have taken care of me. Or it doesn't come from a place of like, oh, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't be asking for this, or I don't deserve this. Instead, it's like, no, it's actually my responsibility. That's my role. And so I am going to make a request. They may or may not be able to meet it, but it's the responsible thing to do, is to take care of this. And that's radical for me. Like, my biggest shift, I'd say, and one of the biggest lessons that I've gotten in, post-pandemic, is the places where I've needed to slow down, feel more, downregulate, be in my ease, it's a different standard than before. And as I attune to that, as I become more sensitive to that, and I take responsibility for that's my job, then I can make responsible requests that aren't messy or clingy or ashamed or embarrassed. I can make responsible requests of my beloveds and feel that they're then at choice. Like, hey, this is what's happening in my nervous system. If we're in partnership, like, are you willing to be on my team and work with me on this or communicate about this? Most of the time, what my nervous system needs is just to be held and heard. And it doesn't need my partners to change their behavior. It just needs for them to attune to, ooh, what's happening? I don't want you to be alone. And I'm so grateful to be in the kind of partnerships where that's possible. And that's not always possible for people. It's more like, this is what I need to do with or without the relationship. And if I need attunement or connection, maybe I'll get it from my friends or from a therapist. But the mature choice is, let me take care of my safety from within. And it's a game changer, because then it's a real mature position, as opposed to the old paradigm of like being in a partnership and it feels like you're tending to the little boy or this little girl, and you're babying each other, and you're really looking for your father figure to take care of you, or your mother figure who wasn't there. Or it's more like, hey, I'm an adult, I'm taking care of me, and I bring my fullness to you, and we're both tracking our own nervous systems, our own safety, and then we're also attuning to, how can I support you with yours? We're on the same team. Our partnership's about looking at, do I need to change my listening? What do you need? Perhaps I need to change my behavior. What's going to support you as we work together to come into, our ease. All right. So having shared that, I'm going to check in for any questions. And I wanted to thank you for your beautiful acknowledgments and yeses and all goods. So it could also be, says Paget, hi, that someone who was very oppressed as a child then wants boundaries or agreements, and that desire comes from that place. Yeah. So many times, so I think what Paget's pointing to, which is quite complex, is like, sometimes we make boundaries and agreements out of our own wounding and out of our fear. Sometimes we're like, hey, I didn't have boundaries or agreements in my childhood. I mean, like, some of our parents may or may not have had any sense of boundaries. Like, I had a family house that my family built a summer home in Mexico that had no doors, and all the windows were just holes in the walls. And it was like, it was symbolic of our house not having boundaries. And so then the mature thing is, now let's set boundaries, because I didn't have them, and that's a healthy thing. And sometimes it's an unhealthy. So I'm wanting to point out that there's a shadow and a light to, how we move in any relationship. And it's important to look at, what's my come from? What need is this meeting? What's underneath the desire for agreements? And then Leah, spot on. You can overshoot and diminish your capacity to process so much. Oh my gosh. Okay, so yes, one of the biggest mistakes I've made, as a lover in my life, has been to say yes to my partners when I mean no. And again, that's when everything breaks down, is me being like, ooh, I really want for you. And I want for you so much that I'm not taking into consideration what I need. And then I end up on the other side of it, making other people miserable, because I become so needy and broke down because I didn't take care of myself from the beginning. So totally agreed that that's a pattern. And some poly people, this is from Sharon Cloud, went completely monogamous because of the pandemic. And that is so true circumstantially. When people are cut off from touch and contact, then it can be like a circumstantial, monogamy. And, at the end, I think it's really valuable to get that polyamory and monogamy are both strategies of love, and it's a bigger field. It's not so much like you're this way or you're that way. Different times in our lives, different strategies may work better. And certainly I have a friend who's pregnant, and her whole constellation changed because that's a phase of life. And then other people who have illnesses, and all of a sudden they're either either they become monogamous, or they need more lovers to support them to support their lovers. And I'm receiving all your appreciation, and I'm also receiving when you have questions or inquiries that you want me to reflect on, as I'm starting to do my live streams once a month again. And I did get a question, I have to say. I was right about to set up, and the question I put out to the world, hey, do you have any, like, on sex, love, relationship, give me what you got. And somebody said, which is a big question and probably a topic for another time, like, what's the best way for a man who wants to learn how to retain their seed, which is, that's my cat, specifically how to have sex without ejaculating. That was their question. And my cat is really curious about that one. So if you're interested about ejaculatory mastery, that's certainly something I'd be happy to talk about, as long as I don't get censored on social media. But anything you want to know, send me your questions, and lots of love. Thank you. Blessings.